we're going back to the topic from the very first call. So we're going to bring in Audrey from Washington. Pronouns are they, them. Audrey, you are live.
Hi, Arden. Hi, Katy. Thanks for having me.
Hi.
Hey, what's up?
How can we help you?
So to start with, it could be a little long-winded, so I can call back another time if it helps. But I tuned in early in the program, but it was right at the tail end of Moldred's call, I think. And I just overheard Arden mention that she'd like to hear more about or discuss more the subject of furry identity as it relates to gender. And I have a perspective on that if it at all would help the discussion.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I come from a pretty privileged perspective in that I identify as non-binary, and I'm not new to my own gender identity and expression. I'm very new to discussions around it, though. My experience with gender dysphoria is mild enough that I didn't even recognize that I was experiencing it until just half a year ago, maybe. And all it took was for me to read up on it a little bit, and I avoided that for the longest time because I was successfully able to adopt the masculine internal narrative of being stoic and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and no emotions for me, thank you.
Yep. I know the one.
And yeah, it's wild. Even as a very young person, tiny little bab, it was wild to me the things that people gendered in their heads. Like the word "faint," for instance. I don't know how they arrived at that, but one of my parents had decided that was a feminine thing, just using the word "faint." Supposed to say "pass out."
Did you say faint or faint? Did you say faint or fate?
Yeah, faint.
Okay.
As in to pass out.
Yeah, because interestingly, I've heard that fate being described as female as well, and I have a whole thing that I could talk about on that. But maybe we'll do that as another call, because there's a feminist thing in here. Anyway, carry on.
I haven't heard that one.
Okay.
Sorry. So the way that it relates to the furry thing, in my case, I find this pretty embarrassing, but I wonder if I hadn't been internalizing all of that masculine stuff, that my outlook on it would be different today. But when it comes to the furry community, there's a heavy community aspect to it, community with a capital C. And being in that experience of not feeling understood in your gender identity, I guess I should be clear. I don't have an answer to how it relates to gender identity. But when I was younger and I stumbled across the furry community, there was some kind of disconnect where this was too good to be true for me. And I found out about all of these different expressions of identity through that. And that involved animal characters. And for me, funnily enough, it started with Sonic the Hedgehog and expressing things through. I was all about the Sonic the Hedgehog, and there was AOL days, right? There was a lot of chat room role plays going on where you just group write a story kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Fanfiction.net, baby.
Yeah, that's the stuff. And so, for me, the identity aspect came in with the characters, and in some way I had internalized the identities of the characters that I was creating until over time, I'd had the identity as a lot of furries have personas. And it's almost like you can't be a furry without one. You got to have a persona. And that's your internal expression of yourself. But for some people, there is something going on. I think the more that I explore the perspectives that I hear from people in the community, there is an aspect to that identity that is important to, like, for me, I guess I shouldn't speak for other people's experiences, but for me, the thing was, there was a distinction drawn between fans and lifestylers. And for me, I was all about the lifestyle part. I wanted to wear a collar and all that and identify as a fox. And I oversimplify, but there were things about that were so important to me that any challenge to it was, it caused this visceral emotion, like you're tearing something away from.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry,
if I can cut in really quick, Audrey, I don't doubt for a second that if like I understand that personas are like an expression of like your internal sense of self. And like, if, for example, someone is an egg, right, that hasn't cracked yet, a trans person who's not aware that they're trans yet, I don't doubt for a second that their persona might have a gender expression that's different than the one that they currently understand themselves to have. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like an outlet for the things that you can't bring forward. And, but what the whole crux of the call with Mildred is the comparison of the concept of identifying with a fox in terms of being a furry with the concept of identifying as a woman, or identifying, I don't even like identifying as, because I feel like it's been co-opted in such a shitty way. Like identifying that you are a woman or identifying that you are non-binary is different from identifying as a fox or identifying with an animal of some sort. And I'm not trying to say that like there isn't some sort of meaning for an individual that can be gained from like, oh, like this furry community and this specific aspect of the furry community in like my identity being like fox-like is meaningful to me. Not disputing that in the slightest, and I'm not disputing that within the community that contains a lot of meaning. What I'm disputing is that when somebody says to like, if I go up to like my aunt and uncle who don't use the internet and I say, I identify as a fox, what that means to them is radically different from what it means when I explain that I identify as a woman. You know, even if they don't accept that I'm trans, those things mean, those carry different weights when I communicate those ideas. Does that make sense? And maybe I'm missing the point, but
I don't know if weights is the term, but like they're different things. Yeah.
I'm with you, Arden, on what you're trying to say. I think the thing that I'm focusing on more is I could have thought of a better way to put it than identify as a fox. Those are literally the worst words I could have used. But
sure.
So the aspects of that identity that are important to the individual, it could be a spiritual thing. In my case, it might have been an aesthetic thing, but again, I'm not sure how my experience has changed that. I'm not sure. Maybe I should collect the thoughts better.
Yeah, I've just got maybe one thing to say on it before we do. I think in trans world, or perhaps internet bell end arguing skeptic trans world, which is where I'm most comfortable and where I spend all my time, it can be very easy for us to just completely dismiss expression and identity. Not to say that it's not important, but you constantly meet all these people who are saying like, oh, being a trans woman is just being a man who wears a dress. And you're like, being trans has nothing to do with gender expression. Like, fuck off. I don't need to talk about that. And they're like, oh, I identify as this. And like, it's not my identity, mate. Like, I just am a woman and I am a trans person, and transitioning has made my life better. And then we can explain these things in those terms, and we can kind of get rid of expression and identity. And because the focus is on pointing at how being trans is something that's kind of fundamentally different. However, to just cast those things away is kind of ridiculous, because expression is like one of the most important things humans do. We wouldn't even be having all these discussions about expression if expression wasn't important to people. Like, every single human expresses themselves in some way, and for sure, as you mentioned earlier, like men are pressured to not express themselves as much in certain ways. But there are rules in society that no one's allowed to express certain things. And, furries do have some kind of, they're expressing something, and some of society has a massive issue with it because they don't like people expressing in certain ways. And, there's a whole huge thing here. And for someone to come along and say, your expression is invalid, how you're expressing your life, your identity as a person, who you are, is like wrong. Like, of course, people would have a reaction to like, fuck off. Why should you have an opinion on how I'm expressing myself? Absolute garbage. Yeah. Go home and sit in your bedroom if you have an issue with how other people express themselves. And then, as you mentioned, like the community aspect of it, like communities are a strong thing. Like I am a metalhead, and I see like the metal community as like my home. They're my people. They're who I identify with the most. And when I see, but certainly when I was a teenager, and people would be shitting on the metal community or metalheads, I would be leery about that. Like, I would feel defensive. I feel like it's an attack on not just me personally, because I didn't mind that so much, but like an attack on the identity of metal. And yeah, it's upsetting and it's invalidating and all this kind of stuff. And that also is a thing that you get for being trans, because being trans, for sure, there's some kind of component about it, which is, like some subconscious part of who you are. But also there is a trans community, and there is a furry community, and there is a metalhead community. And people belong to these groups because society doesn't generally accept those things. And so you end up forming these really strong communities because these are your people. They get you. They know what's going on. They let you be yourselves. They celebrate your expression. And then someone comes along and says, oh, furries are disgusting. Metalheads are stupid. Trans people are weird. And then you're like, no, not only are you coming for my expression and you're telling me that me just doing what the hell I want is wrong for some reason and doesn't fit into your boxes, but you're also coming for my people. And I'm not happy about this. And
right.
I think
why on earth should there be a norm, and why should you be the arbiter?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
maybe everyone could be a furry, and people who aren't furries should be the ones getting the stigma. Like it's just as a ridiculous, arbitrary decision. But so I think that recognizing that there are all these stupid social rules that are just arbitrary is important. I guess, just to bring it back to the original point, like trans people would exist and as a thing distinct, whether we had all these social rules, whether like people were allowed to express themselves or not, whatever the situation is some kind of like component. Metal is something that humans have created, and if we started the world again, maybe it wouldn't happen again, and maybe we'd have different communities and I'd be part of, who knows. But being trans is like a part of humans anyway. That's what I wanted to add on it, and I don't know if that kind of fits with what you're thinking, but we probably need to wrap up the show now because I had forgotten we've got a few more things to fit in. But do you have any like closing thoughts on that? Either Arden or Audrey?
I just want to say, if Audrey, if you refine, no, it's okay. I'll give you a chance to do your last little blurb. I just wanted to say, if you like refine what you're thinking a little bit more and you want to like call in again, I definitely welcome that, because I recognize that I'm not in the furry community and I don't understand every nuance of the furry community, like 100%. I'm sure I am like not representing it perfectly well, and I welcome further discussion on it 100%.
Yeah, and I should be clear, it's kind of the same for me as far as the community goes. I'm fairly introverted, so I haven't navigated the community very much except for my circle of friends. So keep that in mind, definitely. But
sure.
that about covers it. I do want to be clear, though. I don't mean to equate gender dysphoria to the character identity that I mentioned. I found myself suddenly fascinated with the intersection between those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting topic. It was just where we were in the first call was this. I felt like this was a coherent thread that I was able to follow. Not trying to bash you, Moldred. Well, maybe a little bit, but not trying to come down too hard on Moldred. But just there were like points where we would say a sentence and the response felt like there was a different conversation happening that I wasn't clued in on. And I was like, what? But whereas here, I feel like I've been able to follow the thread. And maybe that's a fault on my part. I don't know. But I appreciate your call, Audrey. And I think I look forward to maybe furthering this discussion more in the future.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Awesome. See you later.